In 2074, people discover how to travel through time, but it quickly becomes illegal and is only used by criminals. Because of advanced tracking systems, it's impossible to get rid of bodies, so a criminal group starts sending their victims back to 2044 to be killed and disposed of. The killers, called loopers, find silver bars as payment on the bodies. If a looper survives until 2074, the group sends him back to be killed by his younger self, a process called closing the loop. This final payment is in gold bars, marking the end of the contract. Additionally, 10% of people have developed a mutation that gives them telekinesis, but their powers are generally weak and can only move small objects. In the year 2044, Joe, a looper, stands watch on a solitary farm distant from the bustling city, marking each passing minute with his pocket watch. Suddenly, a person from the future appears and Joe quickly kills him, takes the silver, and moves the body to an abandoned factory, where it's burned. Later, Joe goes to the looper headquarters to use the silver to buy more ammunition. Despite living in a rough neighborhood, Joe confidently drives his fancy car. During a drive, he meets his co-worker Seth, who is using his weapon to scare off someone who damaged his bike. Joe offers Seth a ride, and during the trip, Seth shows off his telekinesis by floating a coin. They arrive at a club where, as loopers, they get special access through the back entrance. Joe visits his crush Susie, who works in a questionable line of business. In a secret room, a group of loopers gather to celebrate a colleague who has just killed his future self. The man is relaxed and announces a celebration. The loopers indulge in nocturnal revelry, engaging in illicit substances administered directly as eye drops. While driving through the city, Joe almost hits a child with his car, but stops just in time. Over the next few days, Joe continues his usual routine of killing people sent from the future and collecting his payment in silver. However, his co-workers are becoming nervous because more loops are being closed recently. One evening, Joe is startled awake by loud knocking on his window. He opens it to find a panicked Seth who rushes inside and shares shocking news. During Seth's latest job, his target arrived from the future, humming a song from Seth's childhood. When Seth removes the bag from the man's head, he realizes it's his older self. The older Seth explains that a powerful crime boss called the Rainmaker is closing all the loops in the future. Young Seth, surprised, frees the man's hands, allowing his older self to escape. Seth is frozen, unable to kill his own future self. Letting a target escape puts Seth in big trouble. Just then, armed thugs from the syndicate start banging on the door. Joe quickly hides Seth and his silver in a secret floor compartment before answering the door. The intruders, led by Kid Blue, storm in. They search the apartment for Seth but find nothing. Kid Blue then drags Joe back to the club. While waiting, Kid Blue plays with his gun, prompting Joe to call him immature. Annoyed, Kid Blue points the gun at Joe. Suddenly, a door swings open, hitting Kid Blue on the head and causing him to accidentally fire the gun. Joe is taken to see Abe, the man from the future who runs the local branch of the syndicate. Abe threatens to take half of Joe's silver unless Joe tells him where Seth is. At first, Joe refuses, but then he remembers his dream of leaving the rundown town and decides to tell the truth. Abe's men leave to find Seth. Meanwhile, the older Seth keeps running, seeing scars form on his arm with an address and a time: 15 minutes from now. As he tries to climb a fence, he suddenly loses his nose, a sign that Abe's crew is torturing his younger self. Panicking, older Seth steals a car and speeds towards the address. He crashes when he loses a leg. Crawling from the wreck, older Seth loses his other leg but drags himself to the correct door. Kid Blue confronts him and shoots him. Behind Kid Blue, younger Seth dies on the torture table. Joe, feeling guilty, goes to see Susie and confesses that he betrayed his best friend. Joe offers Susie half of his silver, but she refuses, knowing the danger that comes with looper silver. Later, Joe goes home and finds bloodstains from Seth. The following day, he heads to the farm for his next assignment. Puzzled by the delay, suddenly, a man appears without bindings or a bag. Joe realizes it's his older self and freezes, giving the older Joe a chance to face him. Young Joe shoots, but the bullet hits metal bars on the older man's back, showing they are made of gold. While young Joe reloads, older Joe hits him with a gold bar and knocks him out. Hours later, young Joe wakes up alone, finding a note in his pocket telling him to hop a train out of town and run. Ignoring the advice, Joe heads back to the city, destroys his phone, and finds his apartment door open and the place completely searched. Joe hides when he hears voices and sees Kid Blue stealing all his silver. He waits for the right moment and jumps at Kid Blue, pushing him into the compartment and locking the lid. Kid Blue fires his gun anyway, and as more of Abe's men show up, Joe jumps through the window and tries to climb down the fire escape. Regrettably, he loses his footing and tumbles onto a car below, rendering himself unconscious. In an alternate timeline, Joe does indeed eliminate his future self. With his contract completed, he travels the world, partying and becoming a heavy addict. Eventually, he runs out of money and starts working as a hitman again to support his lifestyle. He starts killing again and even setting off explosions in various cities. As the years go by, he ages and becomes the future Joe. 23 years after he closed his loop, he meets a beautiful woman at a party. At first, she rejects him, but 2 years later, they are happily married. Thanks to her, Joe overcomes his addictions and his past as a hitman, becoming a clean man. 5 years later, news about the Rainmaker's crimes is everywhere. One morning, Joe wakes up to find a strange number written on his hand. Suddenly, a group of men burst into his house. They are from the Syndicate, here to capture Joe because it's 2074, and they need to close the loop. Joe quickly surrenders, and he's taken away while his house is burned down. Subsequently, in an abandoned building, Joe waits as the men close in on him, swiftly engaging in a brawl and incapacitating them all within a matter of minutes. After making sure the last one is incapacitated, he takes one last look at a picture of his wife and his watch, and steps into the time machine to send himself back to 2044. In the altered timeline, old Joe swiftly incapacitates his younger self, seizing his gun before making a quick getaway. He then visits a store to procure food and medicine, brandishing his weapon to intimidate rather than paying for his supplies. As he does this, old Joe starts to have visions of his younger self's memories, especially of him destroying a phone. Following these visions, old Joe starts to follow his younger self, who is on his way back to his apartment. Knowing Abe's men are nearby, old Joe waits until one of them in a car looks away, then shoots him. He takes the man's gun and heads to the apartment building, just as young Joe is climbing down the fire escape. As young Joe falls, old Joe shoots another man in the apartment, killing him, and then takes young Joe away. News of this chaos soon reaches Abe, who removes Kid Blue from the case and comes up with a new plan to catch both Joes. Shortly after, young Joe wakes up alone at a train station but decides not to run away. Meanwhile, old Joe goes to a library and searches a database using the numbers on his hand. These numbers show 3 possible children who could become the Rainmaker, so he prints a map showing where they live. As he leaves, new scars form on his arm, telling him to meet at a diner. The next day, old Joe goes to the diner and meets his younger self, who has a bandaged arm, showing he was the one who sent the message. They both order the same meal, and old Joe talks about how his wife helped him beat his addiction and stayed with him through tough times. On the day the Syndicate attacked his home, they saw his wife at the window and shot her. Trying to reach her, old Joe was quickly knocked out with a taser. He then talks about the Rainmaker, saying this person is behind mass killings and the expulsion of homeless people in the future. Within just 6 months, the Rainmaker took over the 5 major syndicates, and there are rumors that he works alone. No one has ever seen the Rainmaker's face or knows who he really is. The Rainmaker is closing all the loops, and before dying, a looper friend of Joe gave him some mysterious numbers as a clue. Old Joe shows the map to his younger self, explaining that he wants to find the Rainmaker as a child and kill him, hoping to change history and save his wife. Young Joe is horrified by the plan and refuses to help, suggesting old Joe should marry someone else to protect his wife in the future. Old Joe, not willing to abandon his wife, becomes aggressive when young Joe reaches for his gun. Old Joe quickly kicks him in the groin and hits his neck, knocking him down. Just then, Abe's men arrive outside, and old Joe uses his younger self as a human shield while shooting at them. A gunfight breaks out, and old Joe tells his younger self to run as he lets him go. As young Joe falls, he tears off a piece of the map. Young Joe fires at old Joe, prompting the latter to leap through a nearby window to evade the gunfire. Soon after, Kid Blue arrives with more men, and they start chasing Old Joe across the fields. However, Old Joe is too fast and escapes. The group then focuses on young Joe, who grabs a hoverbike and speeds away through the fields. After a few minutes, he jumps off, letting Abe's men chase the empty bike, and he looks at the torn piece of the map, finding a marked location. Joe finally reaches the location on the map and finds a farm where Sarah and her son Sid live alone. When Sarah sees him hiding around, she comes out with a gun and threatens to shoot anyone who comes near her home. Joe stays hidden in the fields for now, watching the house for hours, but soon starts feeling sick due to withdrawal symptoms. In the city, Abe vents his anger at Kid Blue for his repeated failures. He confiscates Kid Blue's gun and inflicts punishment by breaking his hand with a hammer. Later that evening, Sarah is startled by a noise outside and instinctively shoots when she spots someone approaching. After firing her weapon, she stumbles and falls, prompting Joe to emerge from concealment and assist her. The intruder is just a homeless person who runs away when he sees Joe's weapon. Joe, feeling very sick, vomits and collapses, but Sarah slaps him to keep him awake. Her son Sid also comes out and gives Joe some water. Meanwhile, the police are searching for both versions of Joe, forcing Old Joe to hide in the sewers. Haunted by visions of Sarah and her slap, he focuses on a picture of his wife to keep her memory alive. The following morning, Joe awakens to find himself handcuffed inside the barn. Sarah comes with the keys, still pointing her gun at him, and tells him to leave. Joe declines and then reveals the map with the numbers to Sarah, which leaves her visibly stunned. She fires a shot into Joe's shoulder, causing a scar to appear on Old Joe as well. Sarah is already familiar with what a looper does, so Joe only needs to explain that his older self intends to kill her son. In response, Sarah clarifies that the numbers correspond to Sid's birth date and the medical code of the hospital where he was born. She also mentions that 2 other children were born there on the same day, meaning Old Joe might target them next. Meanwhile, Old Joe finds the first child on his list and, after hesitating, shoots him dead. He leaves the house and collapses, realizing his memories haven't changed. He killed a child for no reason. As night falls, Abe's men find Joe and chase him through the city. Joe skillfully moves through an alley, causing their truck to crash. In a nearby dark building, Kid Blue listens to police radios and finds out where Joe is. Back at the farm, Sarah agrees to let young Joe stay for extra protection and starts treating his wounds. After she goes to bed, Sid shows Joe a clever setup with 2 frog toys that act as an emergency alert system between Joe and Sarah. Surprisingly, Sid tells Joe that Sarah isn't his real mother, sharing memories of his birth mother who died when he was very young. This frustrates Sid because he feels powerless for not being able to save her. The next morning, Joe presents one of the frogs to Sarah and shares Sid's emotional state with her. Sarah admits that she is Sid's mother, but explains she had a troubled past in the city and left Sid with her sister to give him a better life, leading him to think his aunt was his mother. Joe suggests Sarah should clear up the misunderstanding with Sid, but she dismisses the idea. Later in the afternoon, while Sarah is teaching Sid math, he suddenly accuses her of lying about being his mother and pushes her away in anger. It is then revealed that Sid has very powerful telekinetic abilities. The house starts to shake as Sid's screams get louder, and Sarah has to hide in a safe room until he calms down. After the chaos, Sarah carefully checks on Sid, who feels sorry and apologizes for his outburst. At that critical moment, someone knocks on the door. Sarah cautiously opens it to find Jesse, one of Abe's men disguised as a police officer looking for criminals. She has no choice but to let him in to avoid suspicion. Sarah brings him inside while Joe hides behind the couch, ready to act if needed. He sees Sid coming down the stairs and frantically signals for him to go back up. But Sid ignores him and goes into the kitchen, making noise on purpose. Jesse follows the sounds to the kitchen, but Sid slips out through another door and hides in the cupboard under the stairs. Joe quickly joins him, and they both escape outside through a secret tunnel in the cupboard. They stay hidden until Jesse leaves, then safely reunite with Sarah. Meanwhile, Old Joe goes to another location on his map and is heartbroken to find that the second child is Susie's son. Remembering his fond memories of Susie, he can't bring himself to kill the child. He lingers outside the apartment, accidentally getting caught on security cameras, and the footage quickly reaches Kid Blue. That night, feeling lonely and scared, Sarah signals Joe with the frog. He responds and goes to her room, where they share an intimate moment. Afterwards, Sarah shows her own telekinetic ability by making her lighter float. Tearfully, she admits she feels guilty for leaving Sid with her sister. The next morning, Joe comes downstairs to find Jesse holding Sarah at gunpoint. Joe surrenders to save Sarah, but as they get ready to leave, Sid accidentally trips on the stairs. His telekinesis activates, making everything in the room, including Jesse's gun, float. Sarah uses the moment to tackle Joe out of the house. Sid, unharmed, angrily uses his powers on Jesse, making him float and scream until the entire room bursts into flames. Joe realizes that Sid's powerful abilities could indeed make him the Rainmaker, capable of destroying entire syndicates alone. Furious, Joe confronts Sarah for not telling him the truth. She insists that Sid isn't bad. He just loses control when he's scared. She explains that his uncontrollable powers caused her sister's accidental death in a similar explosion. Despite Sarah's pleas, Joe, driven by a mix of fear and determination, starts looking for Sid. He finds him in a field, visibly shaken and covered in blood. Seeing the traumatized look on Sid's face, Joe's intent to kill him turns into compassion. He comforts Sid and warns Sarah that they need to get ready for an attack, as Jesse probably told others where they are. Meanwhile, old Joe decides to take action. He bursts into Susie's apartment, pushing her aside as he searches for the child. But when he enters the child's room, Kid Blue suddenly incapacitates him with a taser. Kid Blue takes old Joe to the club where Abe is organizing his men for a raid on the farm. During a heated argument with a guard, old Joe takes his chance to fight back. He kicks the guard, pushes Kid Blue aside, grabs Kid Blue's gun, and shoots him. In the chaos, old Joe quickly kills the other guards, grabs another gun from a nearby room, and continues his rampage, taking down everyone in his way. He throws a bomb into the main area of the club, destroying the security system. In a back room, Abe hears the commotion and becomes terrified as Joe gets closer. Moments later, Kid Blue wakes up to find a scene of devastation. Everyone in the club, including Abe, is dead. Among the wreckage, Kid Blue finds a map showing the location of the farm, revealing where Sarah and Joe are hiding. As the conflict heats up, old Joe, determined to complete his grim mission, arrives at the farm in a car full of gold bars. He throws a bar to his younger self, telling him to leave, but young Joe refuses and starts shooting. During the chaos, Kid Blue, riding a hoverbike, crashes into young Joe. They exchange gunfire until Kid Blue runs out of bullets. Young Joe takes the chance to shoot Kid Blue off the bike, causing him to crash. After the dust settles, young Joe realizes his older self is gone. Nearby, Sarah and Sid try to escape in their truck, but old Joe blocks their way and starts shooting. Sarah speeds up, trying to run him over. Scared by the violence, Sid's powers activate, lifting the truck into the air and flipping it upside down. Miraculously, both Sarah and Sid survive the crash and run across the field. Old Joe chases them, still firing. A stray bullet grazes Sid's cheek, causing another surge of his telekinetic powers. As young Joe arrives, Sid's powers cause Sarah and old Joe to float in the air, followed by a powerful shockwave that knocks young Joe back. Desperate to calm her son, Sarah speaks soothingly, telling him she loves him deeply. Her words reach Sid, and he slowly regains control, making the telekinetic storm calm down. Afterward, Sarah hugs Sid, protecting him as old Joe, still determined to finish his task, points his gun at them, ready to shoot. The tense standoff shows the clash of past and future at this critical moment, with powerful emotions and loyalties colliding. Seeing what is happening, young Joe has a crucial realization. He understands that if old Joe shoots Sarah, it could traumatize Sid and turn him into the feared Rainmaker. Determined to stop the cycle of violence and revenge, young Joe makes a decisive, sacrificial choice. He takes his own life, which makes his older self disappear instantly. In the calm after this dramatic event, Sarah carefully tends to Sid's injury, soothing and comforting him before putting him to bed, safe from the chaos that almost happened. Later, Sarah goes back to where the conflict reached its peak. Among the remnants of the fight, she finds the gold bars scattered around. Old Joe's last desperate attempt to change the future. She picks up Joe's watch, a meaningful symbol of the time they shared and the cycles they tried to navigate. Holding it in her hands, she whispers a final goodbye, acknowledging the sacrifices made and the new future they might now have a chance to create. A future where perhaps the shadows of their past actions won't loom as large. Thank you for watching our recap of Looper. We hope you enjoyed it and found the complex and captivating story of this film interesting. If you have any comments or questions, leave us a message below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next videos. See you next time.